With the new year come fresh opportunities for businesses. We're now joined by Mark Berrisford-Smith, Senior Economist at HSBC, to run us through the bank's forecast for 2008 and the implications that it could have for business. Mark, thank you for coming in. So the bank's forecast for this year, 2008, what is it?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's not quite as rosy as for 2007. When the numbers are finally totted up by the statisticians, 2007 will have been rather a good year, seeing the UK economy grow by somewhere between 3 and 3.5%. Now, for 2008, we're looking at growth slowing quite sharply down to around 2% and possibly less, with the consumer bearing the brunt of that on the back of interest rate rises and some spillover from the credit squeeze.
Okay, so in terms of businesses, what will the effect of this be?
Well, the first thing to say is that whatever troubles we face, businesses enter this period in good health. Profitability for businesses in the UK has been pretty good of late, certainly very good by historic standards. While consumers have been busily running up debt at a rapid rate, businesses, by and large, have actually been paying debt down, so that most businesses' balance sheets are in relatively good health. So businesses enter this more difficult period in a strong position.
Do you think that's because they had warning that this was coming, the fact that they knew the interest rates were rising? Is that why? Were they forewarned?
Well, partly, but I think it's more to do simply with the fact that this economy has enjoyed a very long period of sustained and stable growth. If you think back to what went on in the 1970s and 1980s, the last 15 years have been something quite different. It's not quite been an economic miracle, but it's certainly for the UK been an economic renaissance. And so anybody who's less than the late 30s would probably struggle to remember being at work during a time when economic conditions have been really difficult.
Absolutely. So in terms of the fact that we are now anticipating slower growth, what will the pros and cons be for businesses in the UK?
Well, it will be more difficult in a lot of areas. The focus of the slowdown is going to be the consumer, who will start to retrench, has already started to retrench indeed, in the face of interest rate rises and somewhat tighter credit conditions. So it's going to be tougher for anybody involved in retailing. It's certainly going to be tougher for anybody in any way involved in the housing market, be it the residential market or the commercial property market. But it will still be a strong year for anybody involved in servicing the public sector. Although the brakes are being applied in relation to recent years, the spending by the public sector in the next fiscal year is still likely to increase in real terms by more than 2%. And the global economy is still growing very rapidly. We are seeing rates of growth in the global economy that we wouldn't have dreamt of 5 years ago. So the global economy grew by more than 5% in 2007, as it did in 2005 and 2004. The Chinese economy last year grew by around 12%. So there are still enormous opportunities out there for anybody involved in exporting if you're able to tap markets in China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf.
So despite the newspapers being full of doom and gloom stories, people being a little bit nervous, you don't think it's all that bad?
No, I think the economy is still fundamentally sound. But whenever we enter a slowdown phase, it is always possible for us to talk ourselves into something much worse. The economy is slowing, but that is entirely what was intended by the Bank of England when it started the process of raising interest rates all the way back in August 2006. The reason it raised interest rates 5 times was exactly to slow the pace of economic growth and to take the heat out of the housing market in order to ward off the effects of inflation. And where we are today is probably still better than most economists would have thought we would be back at the start of 2007, despite all of the problems that we've seen in financial markets.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for some very sage advice.